Well, hey guys, there's like 10, 15, 20 of you. That's I'm kind of impressed that there's this many. You know, I was told that this would be like a group of Bitcoin millionaires. I know. You may or may not be. You have plausible deniability. Yeah, and you guys have been around in Bitcoin for a long time. So I was kind of debating which talk to give, and I was told that this would probably go over better with you guys than the other one I had. I think both are good. This one might be slightly longer. I'll try to keep it a little shorter than normal. Anyway, my name is Jimmy Song, for those of you that don't know, and if you can't tell, I'm from Austin, Texas. You know, I wear this hat. And there's another reason for that, which I'll talk about maybe a little bit later. But anyway, my talk is called the Antifragility of Bitcoin, and it's something I think that we all... Sorry. It's okay. Okay. I think it's something that we all sort of intuitively know about Bitcoin, right? It's anti-fragile. It gains from disorder. Whenever bad things happen to Bitcoin, it seems to do better. And so there's something about that we kind of intuitively know, but we don't really understand. And the two examples that I'm going to give for that premise, if you don't believe me, well, actually, let's do a poll. How many people think Bitcoin is anti-fragile? Okay, how many people don't think it's anti-fragile? How many people are on this side? All right, so some people might be. All right, so here's the basis of my my argument. All right, so who remembers what happened with the Silk Road back in 2013? Yeah, you guys remember, right? Like 2013, Ross Ulbricht was charged with being the Dread Pirate Roberts on the Silk Road. That happened around the middle of the year. Everyone thought there was sort of like an immediate crash because a lot of people thought that Bitcoin would die now that there wasn't this drug market that everyone would be using. Instead, it went on like one of the best bull runs that Bitcoin's ever had. In fact, the second best one, other than the one that happened last year. So that's at least one data point. And here's another one: Bitcoin Cash. Right? You guys all remember earlier last year, August 1st. Before August 1st, there was this fear that okay, if Bitcoin splits into two, it would completely dilute the brand, that people would panic, that Bitcoin wouldn't have this, this special place anymore, and that people would all sell, and that everyone would panic, and things would crash. Instead, what happened? It was $2,700 before August 1st, and right afterwards, we went on the greatest bull run that Bitcoin's ever had. Between those two things, it seems that disordering events cause Bitcoin to get better. So this is, and more or less, this is examining exactly why that is, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. Right, so we already went through that. All right, so let's talk about technological anti-fragility. Okay, and by technological anti-fragility, whenever you examine sort of any sort of sphere in terms of anti-fragility, you have to first look at what are the disordering events? How is it? How can something that's supposed to destroy, how does that affect things? So let's look at some examples of technological disorder. So there are sort of protocol level attacks, right? And depending on the technology, this may be like, there are famously phone systems that completely trusted each other. So, that's sort of like a design or protocol error. There are also denial of service attacks, and this famously happens a lot with websites, for example, right? Like, this is a disordering event. Whenever you got denial of service attacks, that's almost always a way for somebody to sort of shut you down, or meant to shut you down. It's also sort of alternative technologies. That's also another technological disordering event. You may think, okay, well, there's this something else that's supposed to be better. And that can be jarring for technology. The key thing here, though, is that there are very few guarantees when it comes to technology. No one's sort of trying to keep it or guarantee its success. And that's the key to these disordering events. If there were an entity that were guaranteeing the success of something, then none of these things actually matter quite a bit. None of these things actually cause disorder because there's an entity that's backing it. And indeed, that's part of Bitcoin. And technological disorder, if you can survive it and improve from it, that causes you to become much stronger. You've seen websites that have gone through denial of service attacks, right? Like, if you get through it, you have sort of mitigation. You're sort of a better organism as a website, if you will. And that causes you to be a stronger website. And this is why Facebook succeeded, where Friendster did not. They were notoriously slow because they just didn't have the technological backing. Anyway, so let's take a look at how they apply to Bitcoin and how Bitcoin gains from it. So there are sort of protocol level things like transaction malleability. Mark Martinellis famously posited that transaction malleability was why he was insolvent, which wasn't the case. But the fact that malleability existed on the network has led to protocol strengthening. Right? We now have SegWit. We have ways in which we can combat malleability. Multi-sig requires like an op0 and things like that. So that's a gain, right? You modify the protocol or strengthen it through soft forks that make a lot of these malleability attack vectors null. And it's not just a single one. You sort of take care of that whole class of them, and that makes you stronger. Here's another one. This is sort of Bitcoin's version of denial service, and this is transaction spam. Right? That's a form of denial service. Luke Dash Jr. thinks like most of the transactions on the network are transaction spam. But even that, if you can survive it, it's good because it leads to other things like the second layer solutions that we're all looking at. Everyone's pretty excited about Lightning, right? And that's in part because we can totally solve this problem through that. But it's not just Lightning. There are other off-chain solutions like sidechains and even like centralized services or whatever. All of those things have an opportunity now because of the transaction spam.
Coinbase is also.
What's that?
Coinbase.
Yeah, that's another one that I really want to talk about. Yeah. All right. So there are also hard forks, right? This is supposedly better technology or alternatives or people trying to go in their own direction, and they purport to be better software, but oftentimes they're not. But it leads to better software. We have to step up our game if there are more competitors. And in all these ways, Bitcoin becomes more anti-fragile. And the way I would say is it's kind of like a body, right? Whenever you get through a sickness, you develop antibodies or things so that you get stronger as a person. You're now immune to this particular disease. And that's what Bitcoin is acting like. Right? Whenever these protocol level or transaction spam or denial service, whatever attacks come against it, Bitcoin gets better. And there are very few guarantees in this stuff. There's no government bailing you out, right? There's nobody guaranteeing your success by pushing your particular solution. And because of that, we have to become a more prudent community. We're forced in that direction because otherwise we wouldn't survive. And by prudence, I mean we have to be very wise about exactly what we do. And we can't just put something out there and force everyone to use it. Instead, you have to be very careful about what it is that you propose and how it is that it gets implemented. And that's characteristic of a lot of core developers, right? They're very careful. They don't want to put anything out there that might lose people money. And it's in part because we have very few guarantees. And if you think about technological antifragility, the real reason that the antifragility exists is because of the developers. They are the antibodies, right? They are the ones that do the fixing. They are the ones that cause Bitcoin to get better as a result of these disordering events. Every time there's a disordering event, developers develop more stuff. When there was a Bitcoin Cash and there was a hard fork and all of these wallets had to sort of handle it. It sucked for a lot of people, right? Because they had to code all night and do stuff on very short notice. But in a way, it was really good because they not only handled that particular attack, but they also handled all these other future threats. They immunize themselves against all of these other possible ways in which Bitcoin could be attacked. And developers have that sort of organic quality. This is one of the things that Nassim Taleb says in his book, Antifragile, is that anti-fragile things have an organic quality. And I've always asked myself, well, is Bitcoin anti-fragile? Well, it's code, it's software. I don't know. Does it have an organic quality? The answer is yes. Yes, it does. The developers give it that organic quality, right? There are developers that are constantly strengthening the protocol, right? Not just in core, but wallet developers, exchange developers, merchant processor developers, developers all over the Bitcoin ecosystem immunize against specific things like this. And it not only protects against that specific attack, but usually a whole class of attacks that are related to that, right? You don't close that loophole. You close that entire attack surface if you can. And this is also why really good tech companies have continued to thrive and get more anti-fragile. I mean, I don't know if you remember like when Gmail started, right? You would log in and then half the time it wouldn't be there. Well, they have SREs and people that specifically go in there to immunize against specific errors. And they don't encounter that error. And then they get better and better as a result of that. There's a reason why Facebook and Google have won. It's because they have really good developers. And as all of these other altcoins and hard forks go along, they're going to have to survive some of this stuff. And I am really curious as to whether some of them can survive some of these attacks that Bitcoin has already, solved. But will they be able to do it? I don't know. But I'd be very curious to see. But developers give Bitcoin that technological anti-fragility. All right. So the second anti-fragility that I want to talk about is the economic anti-fragility. And you've sort of seen that with like Silk Road and stuff, where it just counterintuitively goes up whenever there are disordering events. So let's talk about the different modes of economic disorder. So first, there are companies collapsing, right? And this sort of thing happens in the banking sector all the time, right? But what happens? The government bails them out. And what happens? The banking sector becomes more fragile, right? Here's another one. There's some sort of government ban, right? Some law that says you're not allowed to do this. That tends to be some sort of economically disordering event, especially if you're selling something and the government suddenly says you're not allowed to sell it. Another economic disordering event is irrational exuberance, right? Too many people get in and they think, okay, well, this is going to be great, and they put all their money in, and then it kind of goes into sort of bubble mode. Again, very few guarantees in Bitcoin, not so much in lots of other things, right? Like you have governments that will bail out banks, right? You have governments that will ban certain activities. And those things tend to fragilize rather than anti-fragilize something. And this is an economic reality. And if you are sort of a capitalist and believe in markets, you recognize this very intuitively, right? Bad things need to die. Good things need to keep surviving. And indeed, these are things that we see in Bitcoin all the time. I mean, very famously, Mt. Gox died, and it needed to die. I mean, if you look at the security practices that they had, if you look at like how they handled everything, they needed to die, and it was better that they died sooner rather than later. Yeah.
Why did Mt. Gox become so large? There were other exchanges, and supposedly they were better.
Well, I mean, it was more a network effect than anything else. But we can get to questions in a bit. But yeah, weak companies need to die, and that actually anti-fragilizes something because there's no systemic risk inherent in that particular company. And I see it as a good thing when a bad company dies because that causes the rest of the ecosystem to pick up the slack. Another one, China has banned Bitcoin like 50 times, right? And now Korea seems to be getting in on that. They're starting to ban Bitcoin like over and over again. But you remember the first time China banned it, it would drop like 50%. Second time it would be a little bit less. Third time it would be even less. And then by the time like you know that China more or less like kicked out all the exchanges, it had almost no effect on price. And that's an anti-fragility that's built into the economic aspect of Bitcoin, and that leads to government irrelevance, right? They can ban whatever. No, we'll just go to a better jurisdiction, and that's more or less what's happening. All right, and bubbles have plagued Bitcoin quite a bit, starting in 2011 and 2013 twice, and even now to some degree there's been a little bit of bubbliness in the price of Bitcoin. And all of those things, you know, if you've sort of gone through it already, it gets you acclimated to the uncertainty. You're already, you've gone through it so many times. I mean, most of you in this room probably don't care that it's gone down 40%. There are a lot of people freaking out right now saying it's gone down 40%. But, you know, for most of us, we don't really care, right? Honey Badger don't care. Why? Because you've been through it already. You've been through it already. You know how this ends.
Cheap Bitcoins now.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Buy the fucking dip. All right, so the lack of guarantees here, leads to sort of a temperance. And by temperance, I mean sort of like doing the right amount of something. Because there's this temptation in society, whenever there are bailouts and things like that, to be too lazy or to be too greedy. And there are a lot of people that are way too lazy, right? And the government bails them out with welfare or whatever. And there are other people that take way too much risk, that are too greedy. And they end up being bailed out by government through some sort of you know, nationalization of the bank or something like that. But either side is really bad. Neither really contributes to society. And in Bitcoin, if you think in Bitcoin terms, the lazy people are the people that never got into Bitcoin. And the greedy people are the ones that went into ICOs, right? There's a happy middle where you actually contribute to society and civilization. And that's where you want to be. Temperance is that virtue. It's being in that middle where you're actually contributing to society and making things better. And that's what this encourages, right? Like when you're too lazy, you're not going to make money. When you're too greedy, you're not going to make money because no one's there to bail you out. And that's a really good thing. And when we think about economic anti-fragility, what are we really talking about? We're really talking about the holders, right? You guys have been through everything, right? If you've held on through the 3-year bear market, you're not going to sell if it drops 50%. You're not even going to sell if it drops 90%. You don't care. You've been through this movie before. You know the future of Bitcoin. You have conviction, and you know that Bitcoin is going to survive, and you don't need to worry about short-term fluctuations because you believe in the long term. Okay? A lot of people that have come in to Bitcoin in the last year, they're not like that, right? They haven't been through the ups and downs. The ups and downs have anti-fragilized you, right? Like you're like the first time maybe you were scared, right? Like with Mt. Gox or something like that, if that was your first crash, you're like, oh my gosh, Bitcoin might die. But you know, the second time you went to it, you know, China banned Bitcoin again. It's fine. And by now, it's just sort of like, all right, I can buy the dip, right? Like your perspective changes, and you become more anti-fragile as an economic actor in the market, and that's a really good thing. And one of the things that I want to make sure that we don't do as a community is bail anybody out. Right? That's what Ethereum did, and that's setting a terrible precedent. Right? Because what's happened since the DAO? No, they got even greedier, right? They're doing all sorts of ICOs now, right? Like it doesn't matter. You raise $30 million on a piece of paper. What do you think's going to happen? Right? Are they being too greedy, too greedy or too lazy? Well, probably more on the greedy side. But that can't last, and that's the recipe for a bubble. And when those bubbles pop, it's pretty nasty. Because it's a very fragile system that they're building with it. All right, so we talked about technological anti-fragility, economic anti-fragility. The third one that I want to talk about is social anti-fragility. And in many ways, this is probably the least understood of the three. We know about technological anti-fragility because it's kind of measurable. You know what code's already there, and You can get all sorts of network statistics. Economic, we understand a little less, but we also have pretty good stats on this, and we can analyze like how many people bought what, and what the volume is, and what the market cap is, and things of that nature. But I would argue that the social anti-fragility is actually the most important. Okay, and in order to analyze that, we have to sort of again analyze sort of the disordering events in a social sphere. And here are some common ones. FUD, right? Like this has happened with every new technology that has ever come into existence. Okay? When they first made electricity, what did they say? They said, well, it could kill an elephant. Okay? They didn't talk about all of the good things that electricity brings. That's what we see in retrospect. You don't talk about how electricity kills elephants anymore. But that's what they said at the beginning, because humans are naturally afraid of new things. And humans, like the incumbents, tend to sort of exaggerate the dangers of something. Okay? I'll also tell you, like, when the microwave first came out, you know what they said? They said it takes out all of the nutritional value of whatever you microwave. Okay? You don't hear about that ever anymore, right? But that's what was in the magazines if you read them in the 1970s. They said, okay, it takes out all of the nutritional value. Now you take microwaves and you think, okay, quick way to heat something up, right? But that's not how people think, and that's not how new technology comes into existence. I'll give you yet another one. Cell phones, when they first came, what did they say? It's going to give you cancer because it's so close to your brain, right? You're gonna constantly do that. This is what happens, right? People don't like the new stuff, and they always fearmonger and do FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Even the internet. Think about the internet. Yeah. It's for pornography and drugs or something like that, right? Like this is a common sort of social attack vector or a social disordering event, and in many ways I call it the tulip attack because we've just heard that so often in Bitcoin, right? And I think you can't be a critic of Bitcoin unless you mention tulips at least once. And I know we're in Holland and everything, so that's even more appropriate. All right, so let's talk about another one: governance takeover attacks. And this happens in social movements quite a bit. And what you'll have sort of a popular uprising, and then a politician will get in front of the crowd and say, okay, well, I represent you, even though I've been in this thing for 5 minutes, right? It's called like getting in front of the parade and like sort of leading it. That happens quite often in any sort of social movement, and that's a popular way to attack the movement or to neuter the movement, and that happens a lot.
And also with Bitgold.
Huh?
Bitgold?
Bitgold? What about it?
Second to X.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it. Right. So, and then the third one, and this tends to be a more sinister way of disordering something, is to just offer an alternative. Well, the reason why they did the elephant FUD, right, around the electricity was because Thomas Edison had DC power, and Nikola Tesla had AC power. He was trying to FUD and say, okay, well, here's this alternative that won't kill the elephant, something like that. So alternatives tend to be another social disorder thing. And there are absolutely no guarantees in the social sphere. And it's very difficult to sort of force social order. Many communist countries have tried, and it doesn't work out very well. You almost always end up with some sort of rebellion. So these are some disordering events. So how have they been handled in Bitcoin? In general, social event, movements tend to die because of these things. But sometimes if you survive, you do well. All right, so, by the way, this is what I keep thinking of with social disordering events. I just heard about Bitcoin, I'm here to fix it, right? That's sort of the attitude of somebody that's sort of leading the parade. I just heard about Bitcoin, I'm here to fix it. All right, so let's talk about the social gains. All right, so first of all, so many people have criticized Bitcoin and have said that it's tulips, that we become immunized to appeals to authority. We no longer recognize authority as being able to tell us what to do. And Jamie Dimon famously said that Bitcoin, said lots of bad things about Bitcoin. But nobody cares, right? It affects you less and less each time they do it. But lots of professors have said Bitcoin sucks. Lots of economists have said Bitcoin sucks. A lot of politicians have said Bitcoin sucks. You know, nobody really cares anymore because they've more or less been proven wrong, right? Like, and this appeal to authority is no longer a part of Bitcoin, right? Like, you know, if Greg Maxwell said something stupid tomorrow, people will call him out on it. It doesn't matter how much respect you have if you say something stupid. All right. Second, businesses are not in charge, right? And this is the governance takeover attempt. The New York Agreement was an attempt by the businesses to represent the entire community. And what's interesting is that in most sort of government, most countries, most places, when you have government and business sort of get together, they control everything, right? they don't really care about the populace. They tend to promote policies that will get people to buy more of the goods of the business and give more tax revenue to the government. They don't really care about the citizens. That's more or less what they do. And that's kind of what they were trying to do with the New York Agreement, right? Like they were trying to force a lot of, sort of force consent, like give the impression of consensus by getting businesses together. And what was interesting about that was that the holders fought back. Right? They're the populace that they were trying to be governed, and they were saying, no, you can't govern us. You're not allowed to do that. You can't lead this parade. And that was really, really interesting from a social perspective because, you know, there was this pushback, and a lot of these businesses didn't know what to do, right? Because they're used to just getting their way. they're used to being able to bribe some government official in one way or another and say, okay, can you make them do this? And then they'll say, oh, okay, yeah, we'll make that policy, and then it's done, and the populace doesn't get to say anything. Instead, the holders fought back, right? And that made us much more anti-fragile from a social perspective. And third, and this is sort of a subtle one, but there are alternatives. But there are alternatives for the more greedy people, right? Like there are lots of altcoins. But you know, if you've noticed, a lot of scammy people have kind of gone away from Bitcoin, right? In the last few years, they've instead gone for much greener pastures in Ethereum, like doing ICOs or something, or creating their own coin, or you know, writing white papers and getting millions of dollars for it. Whatever it is, that's a lot better for those scammers, and they're now out of Bitcoin, right? That makes Bitcoin stronger, right? We now have a very we have a community that sort of enforces the no scamming rule. If you even smell of a scam, we're going to kick you out. And the scammers know that. So they go to other places, right? And all of this you know, shows that, you know, Bitcoin doesn't have any guarantees. There's no sort of Politburo telling people what to think or do. Instead, it's a complete meritocracy. And that's a really good thing. You have to prove yourself to get up and have some credibility in this community. You can't just appeal to authority and say, you know, I know these things, or I'm an economist, therefore you should listen to me. You can't say, well, I'm a business, therefore you should listen to me. You can't say, you know, just like I'm a nobody, so listen to me. It's not completely democratic either, right? Like not everyone gets a vote. It's a meritocracy, and that's what we want in a social sphere. And when I think about you know, social anti-fragility, the thing that comes to mind is you know, the thing that makes it anti-fragile is the community, right? The community around Bitcoin, the social community around Bitcoin. And I would argue that this is a bigger this secures Bitcoin better than everything else. And I'll give you an example. Emin Gunsayer came up with the selfish mining paper a few years ago. And it was a pretty good paper, all things considered. It said, okay, selfish mining is technologically feasible. It is economically rational. Therefore, I have broken this. It's a social community. Okay? Say somebody tried to pull off a selfish mining attack. What would happen? What would happen? Well, first of all, everyone would get pissed at that person, right? Because they're doing something that's reorganizing, making it bad for every business, making it bad for every user. They're going to hunt that person down, right? Whoever's trying to do that. And can a mining pool stay like anonymous for that long? Probably not. And if they get found out, what are the consequences of being found out? Well, everyone's going to isolate you. No one's going to want to do business with you. You are going to suffer some serious social consequences, right? And this is sort of something that the entire community enforces. They know when somebody is being a bad actor. And when they are acting badly, well, they're going to get punished massively. That's why it hasn't happened. Because there are social consequences to doing something that might still be, that might be technologically feasible and economically rational. But they're they're going to get destroyed on the social sphere, and that's going to cost them money. Because no one's going to want to do business with them. That's why it hasn't happened. And really, that's a big security around Bitcoin. And when I say that this is a major part of why Bitcoin works so well, it's true, right? Like there is a community. There is sort of like a lot of people that are enforcing this by saying, okay, well, if this company doesn't do this, we're gonna start boycotting, right? And some of them aren't quite as obvious. Should this company do Lightning yet or something like that? But if it's obvious that they're being bad actors, they get punished, and that's a key component of social community. All right, so we talked about technological, economic, and social anti-fragility. And I kind of repeated this thing about guarantees, right? The thing that fragilizes are guarantees. When a government bails out greedy people, that fragilizes the system. When the government bails out lazy people, it fragilizes the system. When the government gives authority to people that don't deserve it, it fragilizes the system. Okay? All of these things that tend to happen with some sort of central authority don't exist in Bitcoin. And that's what makes Bitcoin so anti-fragile. And it's strange, but we're talking about virtue. We're talking about morality. It's odd because we're in an adversarial network. And through the adversarial network, we come to sort of a sense of morality about what is good for the network, right? We've developed a morality as a community, what is right and what is wrong. And in order to advance Bitcoin and to do good for the Bitcoin community, you need virtue. You need to be prudent, right? You need to be very careful about what it is that you're implementing. You need to be temperate. Can't be lazy, can't be greedy. You want to be in that happy middle where you're contributing. And you want to be a meritocracy. You want to listen to the people that actually are saying the right things and are correct, instead of the people that are leading the parade or have some credential. That's what we come to as a community, and that's a really good thing. And all of that combines to make Bitcoin a lot stronger. And that's really the message today, is that we've gotten stronger as a result of all of these events, all of these disordering things. And I can only hope that more of that happens, because the more sort of chaotic events happen, the better Bitcoin will come out. Okay. Thank you very much. Any questions? Yeah.
Let's talk about network effects and economies of scale.
Network effects and economies of scale?
Yeah, and what they do to anti-fragile systems.
Yeah, so it depends on whether or not the network grows in a fragile or anti-fragile way. If you sort of force everybody, that's a very fragile way of growing something, which is why I never like app tokens, right? Because you're forcing everyone to use their app token to get a particular service. This is why, this is the argument that ICOs always make, is that, okay, if you use our app token, then, the network will grow. But it's not the same growth. If you have growth that's based on voluntary, getting into it voluntarily instead of sort of being forced to use it as an investor, those are two very different things. So, sort of voluntary organic growth versus artificial growth, I think, is more or less what we're talking about. Organic growth is anti-fragile. Artificial growth is almost always not.
So, but what I mean with network effect is that when you have an existing actor that's really large that operates a network, then it is really difficult as a new person in the business to compete with the existing.
Yeah. So there's a giant moat to cross, and it's extremely difficult to compete against that. This is one of the advantages that Bitcoin has. That's not to say that that will last forever, so we have to be ever vigilant and work against that. But I mean, that said, Bitcoin is the only one that's actually decentralized. So I think that gives it a much larger network effect than any of these altcoins that have like a single development team that calls the shots for everything.
But do you think that there might be, let's say, we are also a network of actors like exchanges and other roles miners, who knows what. Is it possible that, let's say, one of the essential roles in the ecosystem can sort of aggregate into a single actor?
They can. I think generally as the single actor gets bigger and bigger, they get more and more fragile. And I think you can kind of see that with Coinbase a little bit, right? Like they're kind of a fragile company. Like anytime there's an influx of users, they crash, right? Like, and they have like a trading engine that can't handle, seem very kind of fragile, and they can't even implement SegWit, right? Like that tells me that their infrastructure.
They don't batching their transactions.
Yeah, they're not batching their transactions. They have like probably a very old system, like that's suffered a lot of bit rot, and nobody's fixing it. That's a very fragile system. So I don't see sort of aggregation of responsibilities. I actually see diversification in sort of decentralized systems. That's the natural state, because if you're a small entity, you can do one thing really well. You have a role in Bitcoin. If you're a large entity and you're trying to do three things okay, you're probably going to get your lunch eaten by the three players that know how to do their small things well.
Yeah. But if you look at the course of human history and you look at empires and companies, then I think large entities will eventually break down due to their own staticness, so to say. Lack of flexibility, but they last for a very long time. I mean, before the Roman Empire broke down, or let's say Microsoft, for instance.
I mean, so Bitcoin's different in this. Well, I mean, I think Coinbase will last as a company for a long time. Will they be a big player in Bitcoin for a long time? I don't know. I actually don't know. I don't know if they can move fast enough. And yeah, sure, there's probably going to be enough venture capital to keep them in a zombie existence for like 20 years. But are they going to have as big of a role? I don't know. Like, how much do you use? I mean, there are lots of zombie-like companies, right? Like that exist. Like, how many of you know Sears? Right? that used to be a big part of the, at least the U.S. economy. But like it's sort of in a zombie existence. I can see Coinbase kind of going in that direction.
Can I ask about the economic fragility, antifragility? So you said, like, it's going up and down, and when it goes down 40%, fuck it, cheap bitcoins, and when it goes up, awesome. And generally the trend is up, but I also see that Bitcoin is still new to the world, relatively new, and it will stay that way for the coming years, I would say. For the coming 5 to 10 years, it might still be new. I mean, it takes a lot of time for people in rural Africa, I guess, to get some bitcoins. But there will be a point at which everyone knows it, everyone somehow has access to it. So I wonder, will there be a point at some point where it just, that's where it ends and then goes down, or how do you see that?
Well, I mean, I guess we would reach hyper-Bitcoinization. At that point, I think Bitcoin becomes sort of the unit of account for everything. But I think that's still kind of far away. And we might have multiple systems on top before we get there. But the general rule of things like that is it happens very slowly and then it happens really fast. And it's just like it takes forever to get there, and then bam, everyone it's kind of like cell phones, right? Like 98, 99, like some people had cell phones, some people didn't, and then like right around 2000, 2001, everyone had them. Like just it happened. And Same thing with like GPS and other technologies. There's an adoption curve at which point it's just really fast. That's just how everyone does it. I mean, there are always people that don't own cell phones and they're proud of it because they're like, I'm a dinosaur, yay. But you know, and I'm sure there will be people that don't use Bitcoin, but I can't. You know, as far as technological adoption, that's how I see it happening.
And do you see Bitcoin taking over, well, fiat currencies?
I'd like to see that, but I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know. I like these are really cool questions that I wish I could answer, but you know, I have no idea. I don't know the future. If I did, I think I could retire or something. I don't know.
It's maybe better to ask, do you hope for?
Yes. I hope for it because I think sound money is the base layer of civilization. And I think if you have sound money, you make all sorts of good things happen. And there's so much more innovation and so much more creativity and so much more human energy going towards growing civilization instead of rent-seeking off the civilization. Which is, I think, what most people do today, right? Like if you work a desk job and it's a government, you know, bureaucracy, or if you work a desk job in some bank or some whatever, like most of those are rent-seeking jobs, right? Like, how do I keep my job? How do I keep my job? The fact that people are thinking that way tells you that it's a rent-seeking job. If you're all concerned about like keeping your job instead of getting more customers, you're probably rent-seeking. And so I hope that Bitcoin becomes the base layer of civilization, because I think there are lots of great things that come out of that, and people sort of have much longer time preferences as a result of that. And instead of like thinking about tomorrow and like eating as much as I want and doing YOLO, going into credit card debt, instead you're thinking 20, 30 years down the road, right? Like instead of like thinking selfishly and saying, okay, well, all right, I'm just gonna buy whatever I want and being all shallow, you start thinking way more further ahead. Well, how can I prep for the next 30 years? And then you start thinking, okay, how can I make civilization better? You know, generally that ends up a lot better than sort of this very, very short-term thinking way that we've got with fiat money as the base layer of civilization. Yeah.
So I think the missing part in this is the privacy
Privacy?
for antifragile.
What do you mean?
Yeah, fungibility from I think that this it make it more flexibility.
Yeah, I mean that's more a technological feature that that may be forced upon us once people try to sort of dox people with Bitcoin or something like that, and that disordering event just hasn't happened yet. But I think we'll get there. Yeah.
I think there are two sides to privacy. One side is it can provide immunity to external actors, but on the other hand, it can hinder the internal social structure.
Yeah, it's weird because like in many ways you can think of lack of privacy as a security risk, because once you lose your privacy, people are going to come after you, especially if you have a lot of Bitcoin. So yeah, I think that's just a technological innovation waiting to happen. It's just not there yet because there isn't a demand for it, because there hasn't been a giant.
I think it's also social.
Yeah.
It's also social.
It could be social. Yeah. Did you have a question?
What's the next big attack you think on Bitcoin that we should all be looking forward to?
I wish I knew. That's kind of like asking, like, how is one country going to try to invade another, right? Like, what's the next attack on Israel going to be like? You don't know, right? Like, you just sort of have to prepare on all fronts and reduce the attack surface as much as possible. And I think we're doing a pretty good job.
Where do you think we are with the forks? Because it seems to kind of fizzed out, right? So, breaking Bitcoin, you had this picture, the top 10 coins, all Bitcoin forks. It seems to kind of have fizzed out a little bit.
I don't think so. I know of at least like 8 or 10 that are trading on exchange.
There's a lot of them, but they're all like less than 1%.
Okay, yeah. So the big disordering event there that hasn't happened yet is a user suing Coinbase for not giving them their Bitcoin Diamond, their Bitcoin Gold, their Super Bitcoin, their Bitcoin 2X, the Bitcoin X, Bitcoin Hot, United Bitcoin, Bitcoin Uranium. Like they're gonna sue, and they're gonna demand their 2.5% or whatever it is like that. And that's going to be a huge disordering event because there is a really good argument that Coinbase should give it to them because they have possession of their coins. They have a fiduciary duty to go and give them the coins that they're entitled to. And that is huge because I think that takes a lot of like centralized exchanges and puts them in a position where they have to figure out how to not take possession of your coins. And that means you have to either like have atomic swaps using Lightning or something like that in order to make it more feasible to be able to run an exchange business.
But at least it would mean that Bitcoin is either money or a financial instrument. So
Yeah.
that would also be maybe a gain for everyone.
Yeah. So I mean, things are going to change, right? And the nice thing about Bitcoin is that if there are sort of negative consequences, the system seems to figure out a way to make the best of it. So, I would say that's probably something that's coming is some exchange, like multiple exchanges are going to get sued for not providing all of these fork coins, some of which actually trade at a pretty high price. So like, I mean, if you have even a decent amount of Bitcoin, getting 1-2% per hard fork, and it's like 10 or 20 forks, that could be like, in aggregate, like 30%, right? Like, especially compounded against each other. So it's like, I mean, there's something coming, and there are going to be more of them, and that's just like the most boring one. There are probably other ones that are, more regulatory and things like that. So, I would say those are all coming. Yeah.
Ask from a technological perspective, which of the altcoins do you think is most interesting?
I think Monero and Decred are pretty interesting. Like just from a technological perspective, I like the confidential transactions implemented in Monero. And the thing I really respect about Monero is that most of these other coins, they just take Bitcoin's code and change a few parameters, right? Monero is like completely written from scratch. It's completely different. Like they do everything differently. Even like base 58 is different in Monero. So like it's like you take the first 7 characters and then you base 58 it and then put a checksum on that character and then you do that for like each 7 character chunk or something like that. And that's very different than Bitcoin, which is like take the whole chunk, you base 58 it, or I mean you get the checksum and then you base 58 the whole thing. So little things like that. Monero is just very different. So in that way, I completely respect it because there's so much in the way of innovation with confidential transactions and utilizing range proofs and things like that, which I really like. But that said, they have the unbounded UTXO problem. So I don't know how you fix that, right? Like you never prune your UTXO, so it can only grow like a small amount, which is why they limit block size on their chain, and you have fees like that. I also like Decred. I really respect the developers there. They wrote BTCD, probably one of the cleanest, like most readable code bases for understanding Bitcoin. It's a full node if you guys don't know, and you can go through the comments and everything, and you can understand it. Oftentimes, what I'll do is if I don't understand something in Bitcoin Core, I'll go to the BTCD equivalent, and you can read the comments and be like, oh, okay, all right, so that's what they're doing, something like that. So they have that pedigree. Plus, they're just trying something new with like on-chain governance, which is interesting. They're apparently coming out with some sort of privacy feature, which I don't know anything about. Full disclosure, I am an advisor for Decred. So, but yeah, but those are the two that I would say. Yeah.
You spoke about the prudence of the developers. I mean, I think you meant the core developers.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for the most part. If you're a wallet developer that screws up, you're probably getting kicked out. But yeah.
Do you think the current price, or at least the price rise last year, influenced their behavior? did they become more careful? And do you think that's a positive trend that they become more careful, or is it coming too soon? Should they get more freedom?
I think they've been. I think they're just engineers. I don't know if price necessarily influences their, if they're extra careful because price is even higher or something like that. Most of the stuff goes in like 6 months beforehand, so it's not timed with price necessarily anyway. I mean, I think in general they're pretty conservative, right? Like they don't want to make big changes. They want to make everything backwards compatible. They want to cause minimum disruption. I mean, you read through this stuff and oftentimes they're like, well, there's this particular wallet that does this thing, like we want to make sure that we take care of that case and make sure those users aren't isolated or whatever. So in that way, I think they're right to be very careful because you don't want to screw over anybody and you don't want users to lose money because that erodes the trust in Bitcoin. So I have a lot of respect for that, and I don't know if at least I got into Bitcoin because I thought it was a really good startup, right? Like it's durable, it's fungible, it's divisible, all of these things. It makes it a great way for me to store wealth over time. And I would think that a very high bar of security or like vetting or making, testing is being required to get a new feature in is a really good thing. Because, you don't want some bug in there that will make everybody lose funds or degrade it or cause some sort of error that you can't really react to. It's a very different attitude than, say, Ethereum devs who want to go to proof of stake now. Who cares about the economics? Like that sort of thing, I think is a little bit irresponsible, especially when you have so much money at stake. So, I mean, that prudence, I think, is warranted and necessary and good long term. At some point, if you're constantly trying to put out something new, especially with financial stuff, you're going to get burned, and then once you lose permanently. So. That's my thought. Yeah.
So, what can we do? What can an ordinary person do to help Bitcoin? And more specifically, what could, say, a guy like me with mediocre programming skills do to help Bitcoin?
Yeah. Part of why I made this talk is because I didn't want people to think that the technological was all there was. Right? You are contributing by being a holder. You are contributing by being a part of the community, and I mean this very seriously. Like you are just as important as a lot of the people that are in core. By being a holder, by having conviction, by holding over the long term, you are a big part of Bitcoin's economic anti-fragility. By sort of enforcing morality, by like punishing the bad actors and rewarding the good actors in the Bitcoin community, you're part of the social anti-fragility. Those are very important things, and do not think that those are like minimized in any way. They are just as important. They contribute to the security of Bitcoin in major ways. So you can't just like dismiss the fact that those are huge roles, right? Like even if you're not contributing as much on the technological front, there's a social and economic front that are just as important. And if you're a part of that, that's great. I applaud you. You're a good holder, right? You're a part of the community, right? Like you're making sure that the companies act in your best interest instead of their own. Those are good things to do, and being a part of that, that's part of my message, right? You're important, right? By being part of this community, you're important. Don't think that you're just some peon because you don't code. It's not the case. I mean, learn to code. I think that'd be great if you did, but that's not all there is. Yeah.
Regarding the social anti-fragility, what if an actor is too big to be punished, and in fact gains by dividing a community?
Like what sort of entity are you thinking about?
Of course, Bitmain. Yeah, but really, they divided the community. They got another chain on which they can sell their hardware. If they maintained it on Bitcoin, they were likely going to over 50%, which would devaluate Bitcoin. So they had to diversify by creating their own
Well,
Bitcoin.
so I get that you think they're the 800-pound gorilla that you can't kill or something like that. I would disagree. I think they're kind of fragile at the moment, and especially from a social perspective, because they are sort of on the outside. Right? Like there's a lot of if there came a competitor right now, right, to Bitmain, there would be so many people that would immediately go to the competitor. The only reason people buy Bitmain's hardware is because they have the best hash rate per dollar. Okay, that's the only reason. Economic reason is the only reason. In fact, I bet you there are people that would be willing to suffer a little bit economically if they had another vendor. And there will be other vendors because it's so freaking lucrative, right? Like I did some calculations that back when Bitcoin was $1,900 about how much Bitcoin makes per year, and this was based on some calculations I did. I have a neighbor that works as a chip designer for Apple, so he knew some of the numbers, and we ran all of these numbers, and we knew, these chips cost this much per wafer and all that stuff, and this is how much it costs to get these components or whatever. Came up with the numbers. Bitmain at that point, I estimated made about 200. Like had it stayed at 1900, would have made about $200 million per year. That was in 1900. It's like 5 times that.
Yeah.
So they're making on the order of like $1 billion or $2 billion a year. Okay, that's a really juicy target, don't you think?
Yeah, but exactly. But that's also the point. You also have to make your chips, and I saw that TSMC is around, I think, 20% of the chips they make is Bitmain at the moment.
And they have all right. So I'm gonna say something good about Bitmain. Don't hate me. Okay. All right. You got to realize, like, Bitmain got to where they are because they're really good.
Yeah.
Okay? All right? Like, there were so many other mining companies that died, right? Butterfly Labs, Cointera, KNC Miner, Spondoolies Tech. All of these mining companies died because they could not compete with Bitmain. I still remember going to the Texas Bitcoin conference in 2014. You had to pre-order a Cointera miner like 6 months in advance. Bitmain was also there. Like they're in one booth, like getting signups for their 2 terahertz miner or whatever. And Bitmain is in the next booth with all of the supply right there. You could buy the Nminer S1, and that got like 400 gigahertz, but it was right there. And you could buy 5 of them for about the same price as the Cointera miner being sold in the next booth. Okay, who do you think's gonna win? The one that knows what the hell they're doing, or the one that's like taking it's kind of like buying an ICO versus like buying something that's real. So they got there in large part because they figured out the manufacturing, they figured out the chip design. A lot of people don't know, but McCree is the big brains behind Bitmain. He's the co-founder with Jihan. He's a chip designer. He knows his shit. He's really brilliant, okay? He hired the right people in the United States to design these chips. He knows the know-how, he knows how to review them, he knows how to manage them. That's why they have the lead that they do, okay? And they brought a professionalism to the mining industry that wasn't there before, okay? And we gotta kind of thank them for that because like everyone else has had to step up their game. Bitfury has had to step up their game. Canaan.io, right? Even Dragon Mint and Halong Mining, whatever. You can't get into this industry as like some person that's just like pre-selling miners and then not delivering. You can't do that anymore. You're gonna get destroyed and eaten by that Bitmain. So as a result of that, Bitmain of course has earned all of the money that they're making. But at the same time, they fragilize themselves socially by getting on the wrong side of a lot of these issues and sort of like just pushing their narrative. And I think that's a serious mistake because they're like, as soon as there is an opportunity, they will get punished like crazy. And I say this all the time, the profit margins are at that point where big companies can come in and seriously disrupt Bitmain, right? You can, and I wouldn't doubt that they've actually started. And I'm talking about Intel, Samsung, NVIDIA, the big people, right? Like they have, like TSMC, great semiconductor company, right? Taiwan Semiconductor, TSMC. they're going to get into it too. Part of Bitmain's advantage is they have a really great relationship with TSMC, and they're able to manufacture lots of chips and get great prices and things like that because they do that. Well, if you have an Intel, a Samsung, going after this market, you bet they have the chip designers to be able to design this well, and you bet they have the ability to compete with these guys on price. And what's more, they can probably undercut Bitmain significantly if they wanted to. They don't need to. They could actually make a lot of money and charge slightly more than Bitmain. They would probably get a ton of miners, a ton of sales just all over the world from people that don't want to be locked into a single vendor and don't want to support Bitmain. So in many ways, I think the days of Bitmain are limited. You're not going to have a monopoly forever. Yes, they do have some chip patents that are very valuable, but they're poking the wrong bears, man, and that makes them very fragile. Yeah.
So a lot of mainstream crowds that are getting into Bitcoin right now, they're finding it difficult to understand it all, and they say it all. Even the Bitcoin addresses are just intimidating to them because I guess there's just a lot of characters. And I'm going to put this one quite bluntly, but if we want to help Bitcoin grow, should we make it more approachable to dumb people? Or should dumb people just have to become smarter at some point?
I'm more for the latter. I think if you're stupid, you should get punished for your stupidity. And if you're smart, you should be rewarded for your smartness, right? And people become wiser over time whenever they do that. I mean, a lot of the people that are playing with, whatever altcoin of the week is, right, and trade and then lose their money, well, they're going to learn their lesson. Actually, no, I take that back. There are going to be some. There are going to be some of them that are going to go complain to whatever government authority about how they got scammed, and then they're going to try to be in it. Those are the people that are just fools, and they don't want to learn anything in their lives and blame everybody for their problems instead of taking personal responsibility for things. But that said, there are some people that learn, and I think that's how you become a wiser person. That's how you become more virtuous. That's how you contribute to this community. And I don't want the dumb people in the community, right? I mean, in many ways, we have a lot of dumb money in Bitcoin right now. And the recent crash is actually good because a lot of that dumb money left. And if you are dumb money in Bitcoin and you hold through it, you become wiser, smarter money, right? You don't stay dumb money. But if you sold after it dropped 10%, well then you're probably staying dumb money, right? And that's the positive feedback loop that I think the market sort of naturally has, and I hope we take advantage of it. And a lot of the weekends that dropped it, well, they I mean, to be frank, we're a little bit more economically fragile anytime we get into a bubble, because there's a lot of people that bought that didn't hold through all of the previous bubbles, so they don't have that holder mentality, right? Instead, they're thinking, okay, well, this will go up and then I'll sell it. I don't think you really want those people in there. Every run-up, you get some people that are real holders and other people that are sort of playing with the money or whatever and hoping it doubles so they can pay off or go get a Lambo or something. You want those people out. You want those people to get out, or maybe they provide a little bit of a liquidity, but largely they're not really useful to the community long term. They're the ones that get after 6 months, if it doubles, they sell and they're out, and it's well, okay, what did you do? I guess you helped for a little bit. You chain 10 of you together, maybe it's okay, but other than that, it's not really that useful. So. Moving forward, you want the people that really believe in it, or you want to make people believe in it through the process of holding and realizing and educating or whatever. Making it friendlier for dumb people, I mean, dumb in what sense, right? If you're sort of economically dumb and just chase after the latest fad, no, I don't think you want those people in. But if you're dumb in the sense that you don't necessarily understand the technology, but you understand its long-term value as sound money because of the 21 million limit and things like that, well then I think I'm all for making it friendlier towards those people. Yeah.
First of all, thanks for giving the talk. It's very informative. And, we discussed the alternative cryptocurrency that emerged a bit earlier, but one question we noticed a lot in the media and in the Netherlands, we now notice it in politics a bit as well. Is a lot of this criticism that's currently being rolled at the proof of work mechanism that lies at the foundation of Bitcoin. And well, two questions I have is, do you think there is any genuine legitimacy to this criticism that we face? And do you think there is any merit in the various alternative cryptocurrencies that have emerged that try to implement alternatives to the proof of work mechanisms, such as currencies that implement proof of research, proof of storage, proof of stake, all these various other attempts at creating alternatives?
Yeah, great question. I think I get that like every time now. Like, what about proof of work? Doesn't it waste too much energy? Well, all right. So let's look at the alternative. Let's look at the U.S. dollar or something, any other fiat currency. Okay. Think about how much waste goes into that. Like how much is like wasted in creating that currency. First, you have the physical bills themselves, bills and coins. Okay, so there's some energy. Say it's kind of money. But then you have to pay all of the people that are managing it, right? Like that doesn't come for free. You have to pay for the buildings that house it. Yeah, and do you think that's free? Not really. There are also banks on top of that, right? Like that, you have to build all those buildings. You think that's free? You think that requires zero energy? No. How about all the people all the ATM machines, right? Like all of the infrastructure that you have to build around it in order to make the monetary system work. You think that's free? No, it's not. You have bank software. You think that runs for free? No, it doesn't. You have like bank tellers. You have people that are driving to the bank. You have all sorts of things, and you have the entire banking sector that more or less is a cost to create that fiat currency. Those are not free. And if you look at the statistics of the banking sector, oftentimes it's like 10% of the economy. That's a lot more than what Bitcoin pays for its mining. So that's one thing. The other thing is that everything is proof of work. And there's a blog post by Paul Stork that talks about that. You can say it's you can try proof of stake, proof of resource and time, proof of whatever. If human action can cause you to get more of whatever, then it's proof of work. It's just in another obscured form. So, for example, with proof of stake, if I want to stake mine and I don't have the capital to create a large stake, what am I going to do? I'm going to go borrow money, right? So I can buy that large thing. Where does that money come from? Well, it has to come from something else, some other economic activity. Oftentimes, it's not as obvious as like actually mining like SHA-256 hash. But all the way down the line, it ends up in some sort of energy use. The difference is that proof of work is obvious and clear. Proof of stake is obscure and like nobody knows exactly where it comes from. So like people seem like more okay with it or whatever. But economically, it's exactly the same. It's all proof of work. It could be resource, space, time, whatever. Doesn't matter. It's all work. It's all work. They're all the same.
So would you argue that there is a sense of a qualitative difference in the work itself when we compare coins that try to award new coins to people who perform scientific research, for example, that tries to eliminate dangerous diseases and use this process to distribute the coin versus our cryptocurrency that performs a form of
yeah, you're talking about maybe adding another societal good on top of it, but like the economic equation is almost always the same. Right? There's whatever good that you're getting out of that activity, that just gets like as the market matures, that ends up being the same. Like the cost of the proof of work ends up being the same because you add work to that. And if human action can help it, they're just going to put more resources towards it. And like we tried this with Primecoin, didn't really work as far as I guess you found some interesting prime numbers or whatever, but you know, as far as the price, like it didn't make it any more efficient. Yeah, I really need to articulate that a little bit better. Maybe I should write a blog post about it because it just gets asked so often, and it seems to be sort of a topic du jour right now. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, it's a question that we happen to face a lot lately, so it's interesting in this.
Yeah, over there.
So I just have a follow-up question on that, because I heard the argument a lot, well, Bitcoin uses a lot of energy, banks use more, but just the argument that someone is worse than you doesn't make you better.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that's not the
second part
question.
of the argument was that it's all proof of work, and you can't make it better than proof of work.
Is it not the question, do we think the energy usage of Bitcoin is worth it?
Of course, for sound money, absolutely. Yeah, and like I said, it's the base layer of civilization, right? Like when you have bad monetary policy, it has, or when you have bad money, it has like add-on effects all over society. Everything that you build on top of it, like does weird, or it has weird effects, and it doesn't do what you would think. And you know, if you can fix some of that, of course it's worth it. When you have hard money, you fix a lot of these problems that you typically see in fiat money societies, where you know people are kind of materialistic and short-term focused, don't contribute to society, eventually leading to civilization collapse. So yeah, is civilization worth it? Yes, I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think you can see mining as a sort of a defense thing, like having an army, because essentially it defends the community against attacks for changing the history of the blockchain, right? So I see the blockchain as a pile of gold, and mining as a guard who's sitting with a gun on top of the pile of gold. So you have to pay the guy to continuously protect your pile of gold. If you stop paying the miners for doing their job, well, they're not going to put work in it, and you become very vulnerable.
Yeah,
but that's also the question that rises from this. I'm not sure if you agree with this, but the question that comes from this is, how much do you need to pay? What is a good amount of defense? And does Bitcoin somehow automatically have the right trade-off in that, or could it be wrong?
I'm not sure how to answer that question, because it's an economics question that only the market can answer, and the market seems to be answering that it costs about as much as people are willing to put into it. And if you go to a mining farm, I'm sure they can show you the numbers based on that.
Yeah, but there is a coordination game in it, right? I mean, everybody pays essentially for space in the blockchain, and somehow we hope that collectively that is sufficient to protect us.
Well, we're being protected by proof of work that the miner produces, and those take we know roughly how much energy they would take given the current miner efficiency. So that is pretty good security. I don't know how you price that other than what miners currently pay.
Yeah, maybe a possible way to think of it is, what would an attacker be prepared to pay in establishing a 51% attack?
Yeah, I don't think anyone would execute that for the socialist community reasons I added earlier.
What's the price of attack for $4?
Yeah, but it depends on your incentives, right?
Yeah.
If you just have economic incentives, apparently it won't work, because we have, for a short time, we had a miner that had a pool that had 51%, and they decided, well, for economic they decided not to attack, and I suppose that at least for the time being, it economically doesn't make sense to perform the attack.
Yeah.
But suppose that somebody wants to attack Bitcoin as a system. That could be an additional incentive to attack, to perform an attack.
The futures market makes it more complicated, because you could short it and you don't care at all about your social reputation.
That's true, yeah.
All right, any other questions?
Time for steak, maybe?
I would love some steak.
Oh,
I would love some steak.
I've got one more question.
Yeah.
You mentioned your hats and that you would come back to it. Why?
Oh yeah, I
why
forgot to
hats?
talk about that. Yeah. So I like all of this is it's nice because there's a lot of room for new companies, right? You can almost make new categories of companies, and it's a lot like the Old West, right? The Old West, where there was a lot of opportunity, but also a lot of danger, right? Because you might get shot or whatever. And that's how I feel Bitcoin is right now. It's in this place where it's very very dangerous, but also like there's a lot of opportunity, right? There's a lot of money that you could be making, and you have this opportunity to blaze your own trail. And I think for a lot of people, they're used to sort of going on trails that other people have gone on, and that's what most careers are. Is when you say career, it's almost always a path that someone else has taken already. And I think we need to have a new mentality when it comes to Bitcoin. You can go blaze your own trail. You can make your own category. You can make businesses that no one's ever thought of. It's not about fulfilling some childhood dream of becoming a doctor or something like that. It's making something of yourself and creating value and adding value to civilization. I think that's what Bitcoin is about, and I can see it as the whole Bitcoin ecosystem is developing. That there are lots of people that are thinking that way. And that's a lot better for civilization than this sort of rent-seeking career sort of paradigm that we're all used to, where you go and do the same job for 30 years and rent-seek off of some company and then die and not really contribute anything. Instead, you can create something, you can make something, and you can make civilization better. You can innovate. Right? This is the excitement around crypto. It's the Old West, and there was this what was it? The archetype of in the 1800s. Okay, the archetype today is be the family man, like work for the same company for 30 years. That's quote unquote the American dream, which is really tragic. The American dream is all about rent seeking. There was the 1800s archetype, which I like a lot better, which is the self-made man. Right? You go out west, you make something of yourself. Right? You contribute value, you make something of yourself, and you contribute and make everything better. And I'm hoping that many of you guys in here sort of take that seriously, right? Like, you can make civilization better. You can make your wealth and Bitcoin last generations. This is the largest transfer of wealth that we're going to have for a very long time, and I can see this becoming a major thing that you can leave to future generations that can make a huge difference. So that's sort of my message with the cowboy hat.
Thank you very much, Julian. Welcome.